No, that won't work, will it? Okay. Well, okay. Off to the scientific method. While I'm recording this, my phone's exploding. So anyway, that's I'll just ignore it. Research methods, the scientific method, all of that. Okay, sociology is the study of society or the scientific study of society or the study of social behavior in human groups. We look at people. We look at people interacting. We look at people forming groups. We look at social institutions. We look at it empirically, employing the scientific method. We are Therefore, sociology is a science and it's an empirical science. That's basically being redundant. It's not just a bunch of opinions. We look at the world scientifically and come up with theories, perspectives, models, etc. We believe that opinions based on observation are superior to positions not based on observation. So if you make a claim, I might ask you to back it up. What observations, what studies have been done, what empirical studies have been done to really back that up? Okay, so and sometimes in some sociological studies there are some assumptions made. Okay, so um, you know, and finding the assumptions are pretty cool. Science has assumptions sometimes. It really does. Okay, so um, so sometimes some people say that sociology is the study of the obvious, and that annoys me. And I'm going to show you how it isn't the study of the obvious. Okay, I'm going to show that here. Okay, so let's start off with some terms from the scientific method. Now you've heard these ad nauseum. Okay, some of this comes from Dalton Conley. Some of this comes from Margaret Anderson and Howard Taylor in my former textbook. Some of it comes from the guy who wrote the book on research methods in sociology, named Earl Babby. He did write the book on research methods in sociology. Okay. Scientific methods is steps in the research process, including observation, hypothesis testing, analysis of data, and generalization. So the scientific method is a process that you go through. Okay, there's a diagram in the Conley chapter that looks like he drew it on a napkin or something. I don't, or drew it on something, but I would look at that. Okay, to get to the scientific method. Okay, two approaches here that we're going to talk about: the deductive approach and the inductive approach. The deductive approach is a research approach that starts with a theory, forms a hypothesis, makes an empirical observations, and then analyzes the data to confirm, reject, or modify the original theory. Okay, so this is mostly how you learn science at first. You started with a theory and then you formed a hypothesis and you didn't experiment in a lab and then saw what happened. Like it reminds me of my chemistry class in high school. Okay. Yeah, that's very valuable. It needs to be done. It is very, very important that we test our theories. Okay. But what I find more exciting is the inductive approach. Okay. Research approach that starts with empirical observations and then works to form a theory. Okay. Well, um, that's more fun because you might ask yourself, you might say, self, where does theory come from? And and where it comes from is that it's induced. Okay, it's the inductive method. It starts with just empirical or with like observations, and then it works to form a theory. Okay, you know that story about Sir Isaac Newton and the apple and all of that. So it's how the apple fell on his head and stuff, and he's like, wait a second, I think it fell on his head. Wait a second, why did that happen? And he worked and formed a theory. Okay, that's where theory comes from, observations. And then you have a theory, you test it, and you look. So there's this whole wheel we'll get to. What's a theory? It's a systematic explanation for the observations that relate to a particular aspect of life. A systematic explanation for the observations. So, why did this happen? Okay, it's like, it's based looking for an explanation, like an explanation of like why things happen the way they do. Okay. When it comes to human beings, though, it might be a little bit different because theories are kind of limited. Because one thing about science and sociology is that we really don't have any natural laws of human behavior. They're really not there in terms of like that this must occur like this, okay? Not like gravity, okay? Um, I like what Neil deGrasse Tyson said. He said something like, I think I've got the exact words. When it comes to human beings, everything goes nonlinear. That's why physics is easy and sociology is hard. He said something like that. That's almost the exact sentence. Therefore, I claim sociology is a hard science because Neil deGrasse Tyson said so. Okay, did you get the joke? Okay, a hypothesis is a prose relationship between two variables. A hypothesis is based on the theory. So if this theory is true, you're going to do a test. So if you're going to test gravity and what goes up must come down, you're going to throw your keys up in the air and see if they come down. Okay, so um, let's see. Um, and then the generalization. The ability to make claims that a finding represents something greater than the specific observations on which the finding is based. This is hard to do in sociology because we differ so much culturally and structurally from society to society. For example, I studied part of my dissertation was studying the intensive care units in hospitals. But if I studied it, say, I studied it in the United States, but say I studied it somewhere like um, India, I'm sure I'd find some different things. I can't necessarily generalize from my observations in the United States to what happens in ICUs in India. So that's hard to do. Like generalizability doesn't necessarily go universal, things like that. So here's a little thing about back to science here. This is something called the wheel of science. I kind of like this. When you're doing deduction, you start with a theory, you form a hypothesis, you observe what happened, and then you make empirical generalizations. Okay. Doing induction starts with observation. You make empirical generalizations, and then that goes up to the theory. Okay, so deduction starts at the top and goes down, and induction starts at the bottom and goes up. And as I said, induction is like my favorite stuff. In sociology, you get more of the cutting edge stuff from induction. Okay, so I would like you to stop this recording or pause this recording now, and then go and open um, this other video I have titled Palo Alto Schools Hit by Suicide Make Changes to Reduce Student Stress. Okay? Play that video to yourself. Play that video and then start this up again. Okay? So once again, pause this recording and open up the recording. Palo Alto Schools Hit by Suicides Make Changes to Reduce Student Stress. Play that and then come back to this recording. Okay? And I'll see you in a bit. Okay, we're back. So I'm going to talk about here suicide from a functionalist perspective. Okay, so talk about suicide from a functionalist perspective here. So to remind you, Functionalism is, as Dalton Conley says, the theory that various social institutions and processes in society exist to serve some important or necessary function to keep society running. Okay, well, I'm asking kind of rhetorically, how would suicide serve a function to keep society running? And one answer from a functionalist perspective is that it doesn't. It is a dysfunction. Okay? Any process that undermines the stability or survival of a social system. Okay? Emile Durkheim published Suicide back in 1897. And in so many words, Durkheim views suicide as dysfunctional for society because it weakens the collective idea of the sanctity of life. Okay? Durkheim says, quote, "Suicide must be classed among immoral acts, for in its main principle it denies this religion of humanity. A man who kills himself, the saying goes, does wrong only to himself, and there is no occasion for the intervention of society. This is an error. Society is injured because the sentiment is offended on which its most respected moral maxims today rest, a sentiment almost the only bond between its members, and which would be weakened if this offense could be committed with impunity. From the moment that the human person is and must be considered something sacred, over which neither the individual nor the group has free disposal, any attack upon it must be forbidden." Okay? So Durkheim is scared of something, scared of the modern world. Okay? He is worried that we're being held together more by the tasks that we do in the modern world rather than our values. Okay? So, and so basically our shared social values are getting weakened in the modern world, and he was concerned about that. Okay? Leading to something called anomie, which I'll get to in a bit. Yet, one of the few values that we share is the sanctity of life, the idea that life is sacred. Okay? Durkheim is afraid that if we just let people commit suicide, that weakens the idea of the sanctity of life. Okay, so that's why we say that suicide is a bad thing and we don't want people to do it and we discourage it. Okay, so Durkheim has 4 different kinds of suicides that are based on 2 variables. Okay, social integration is the degree to which collective sentiments are shared. Okay, social integration is a shared collective consciousness, it's common values, it's common norms. Okay, social regulation is the degree of external constraint on people. This is social control and one's accountability to the group. They are very related. Okay, they're not the same thing, but they're related. Social integration. When you have social integration, you feel more regulated. Okay, you're more regulated by groups that you belong to than groups that you don't belong to. Okay, so social integration comes first, then comes social regulation. Okay, so Durkheim's types of suicide. I guess you could have social regulation without feeling integrated. Yes, you could, but oftentimes they're very connected. Okay, Durkheim's types of suicide. Okay, so 4 types of suicide. If you have low social integration, you might be at risk for an egoistic suicide. That is in which people do not feel like they're a part of society. In the modern world, many individual pursuits are valued higher than the collective consciousness. This is where people may fall into depression. Okay, but it's not depression that causes suicide, but the lack of bonds or a collective consciousness. Okay, Durkheim said The bond attaching man to life relaxes because that attaching him to society is itself slack. Okay. So the less we are attached to society, the less we're attached to life. So those who lack strong integrated bonds to groups, lonely people, people who feel rejected, okay, are more likely to commit suicide. Um, the suicide rate for gay teens is about 3 to 4 times higher than those of heterosexual teens, for example, or 2 to 4 times higher, I should say, depending upon the study. Most studies say 3 to 4, I think. But yeah, it's higher. Okay. And that's often because of the rejection that gay teens are, I should say, gay, lesbian, bisexual teens. There's not enough research on transgender teens yet, okay, to really make that generalization, though I do think it's higher. Okay. That's an example of low social integration. High social integration might result in an altruistic suicide. Okay, that's in which someone commits suicide for the group, for the sake of the group. Okay, um, kamikaze pilots during World War II that would fly their planes into ships, suicide bombers and terrorist attacks. Um, the the spy who takes the poison pill while captured in order not to divulge state secrets under torture. The soldier who jumps on the grenade, okay, gives their life for um, their other soldiers. That's an altruistic suicide. When you give your life for the group. Okay, that's high social integration. Okay, so that's where you like really feel a part of the group so much you'll commit suicide for them. Social regulation is, yes, if you have low social regulation, that might uh, result in an anomic suicide. Okay, the anomic suicide is where like people don't know what to do. Anomie, Anomie, means normlessness. Okay, it's that heard this definition once in my very old textbook from when I was a student. Uh, Lack of direction that people experience when social control becomes ineffective. Okay, it's when people don't know what to do, when there's no like direction for people to go. Okay, this is where it's when life becomes meaningless. Okay, this is when people are at a higher risk of suicide. So again, it's sometimes hard to tell the difference between an egoistic suicide and an anomic suicide. Okay, um, a fatalistic suicide in which there is too much social regulation. Okay, um, too much social control. And the individual decides they cannot live under these conditions, and there's no way out except suicide. The prisoner that hangs himself in the cell, okay, is committing fatalistic suicide. Okay, so now I used to have, or actually in class, I do a lesson on induction, but I really can't do it online. But we're going to do a little deduction here. So, given the video clip that you watched and this um, theoretical lesson, I want you to hypothesize, come up with a statement of which age group has the highest suicide rate and the lowest suicide rate and why. Okay, so what you do, this is in the module, is that you go to something called, this is from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Go to um, Fatal Injury Reports, National, Regional, and State 1981 to 2007. The link is right in module number 3. And do some research to test your hypothesis. Okay, so I want you to, this is your in-class activity. So basically, you have this database where you click on a couple of things and you test which age group you find the suicide rates of different age groups. So make sure you click suicide at the top box and then play around with the age groups at the bottom. You have to go through each age group, like 10 to 14, 15 to 19, etc. So then write up your results in the assignment section. Were you correct or surprised or why? So basically, what do you think it is given our little discussion, or our video and our the little like talk I gave? Okay, so I am going to give you so come up with the answer, write it up, and then next time I will the next time, probably next week at some point, I'll respond. Actually, I might respond in your comments to you. I think I'll do it this way. I think I'll respond in the comments to you in the box, okay, about this. So anyway, play around with this and and yeah, have some fun. Okay. Uh, Thank you, and I will and I'll see you when we talk about culture and media. Okay, bye.